So that takes to number 6. Number 7, parking for residential units shall comply with section 6.4.3 of the Leeds zoning code, which is the parking requirement, unless a modification to these parking requirements is specifically approved by the town council. Now, we briefly went through this in the previous meeting, and at that point the discussion was there would be no modification, and that basically the parking requirements that are outlined would apply. The only, I guess, possibility was when they got into mixed use or multifamily, you may consider a modification. Right now, you know, the standard is 2 parking spaces per unit. I think because in closed garage in a single family, that's fine. So I think, so maybe we just leave that wording as it is.
I'm comfortable with that wording because the mixed use ordinance itself does allow for some modification at the town's discretion for mixed use. And that's going to be on a case by case depending on what it is. I think that language on 7 is good with me. I don't know about the rest of the council.
I have no problem. Should we go to number 8 then?
Yes.
Maintenance responsibility for public streets and utility systems shall be determined and approved as part of the final development agreement for Great Line Wash. I don't know that that has been addressed yet. Who will be responsible for street maintenance and utility system maintenance?
We have not had any discussion on that, and that will come up in discussion on the final development agreement.
Is that even the name for this? Is that
that we have this as a next discussion item later this evening if we get to that on that development agreement.
Should we go on then?
Yes.
So number 9 is a second public street access is required when the Great Line Wash has 101 or more dwelling units, and the third public street access is required when 600 or more dwelling units have been issued building permits. I believe that requirement, those numbers come from the fire code, I believe.
That's where they did. I specifically asked that. Those numbers did come from fire code, from our fire chief.
That's in the proposed traffic mitigation plan already from Great Line, those numbers.
Number 10, the last one was Great Line Wash shall create a project-wide master homeowners association with the CCNRs, which creates an architectural review committee for the project. The architectural review committee shall review plans prior or before submittal to the planning commission and town council. So that just is to ask or require a little self-policing among their project to make sure that before they submit it to the town, they've internally reviewed it, said yes, it meets our, the pattern book.
Can we go back to number 9? I have a question. We're missing one definition here. If I read this correctly, the Great Line has 101 or more dwelling units. So are we saying that 101 dwellings, or are we saying 101 units? So if I build 10 apartment complexes with 30 units in there, are we talking units?
Yes.
What happens if, though, I have a call center that employs 3,000 people that's built there, but we haven't had but maybe 2 apartment complexes built?
Well, that's a good point, and that we need to. You could translate commercial development into dwelling unit equivalents or something in terms of trip generation. But this is really just focus more on residential development. So, in the development agreement, we should address commercial development. How do you
right, because the impact is on the community going through Main Street.
Right.
So that's the crucial part.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, I think the planning commission really, that wasn't, the focus was strictly on residential. And your point's a good one. I mean, if residential doesn't happen for a long time, commercial happens to take off with an employment center, yeah.
And I know this is going to get brought up again, but remind me again, on that 101 units, how much traffic is that going to put down Leeds Main Street?
Well, 101 dwelling units, the trip generation varies. You know, if it's just a single family detached, typically it's 10 trips per unit. Could go down to maybe 6 trips per unit if it was a townhome or condominium. And so, in the traffic mitigation plan,
It's about 6,700.
well, depending on the level of service, I think it's been suggested that the maximum would be 8,100. Now, we can get, that's the next topic on your agenda, is discussion on the traffic mitigation plan.
But that ties in with what we're all kind of somewhat agreeing to here.
Yeah. I mean, this just simply, it was more of a fire code requirement. It talks about the number of accesses that are required into the project, not necessarily how they're dispersed or, you know, where those trips go.
Just wanted to make a note of that.
I'd like to have the commercial part calculated in there if possible.
I agree. Yeah, that could,
In talking with Chief Lewis, I had the impression that this is specifically what the state fire code calls for, is dwelling units, looking at the overall population, not the number of people who might be there working during the weekday.
that's the point we need to just address, yeah. Because what happens in commercial development will by chance to take off more than residential.
Which is highly unlikely,
Yeah, it does seem likely
but
that's possible.
it's highly unlikely that you're gonna, but the owner can do that. I mean, if that's what they want to invest, you know, their money into, so maybe it would be good to have some type of,
Yeah.
some type of a
We have
number.
to cover every basis, so
Okay, what do we? So back to number 10 was just again the requirement that they create a master homeowners association and have CCNRs for the development.
Okay. Let's move on to discussion item number 6, which is the traffic mitigation plan of Grapevine. Where do we want to start on that, Bob? Or where do you think would be the best place to start?
I guess just let me look at the latest draft, and I think the second paragraph is probably worthy to read. It says, Grapevine fully supports the town of Leeds' interest to not widen Main Street to a 5-lane facility. Therefore, Grapevine supports the town of Leeds' interest in a fully functional 4-way I-15 interchange. Instead of widening Main Street south between Silver Reef Road and Cemetery Road to 5 lanes, Grapevine is willing to commit funds to the town of Leeds for a match of UDOT funds necessary to construct a fully functional 4-way interchange or other appropriate interstate improvements. Grapevine funds would be equal to the cost of its proportional share of adding 2 travel lanes to a 3-lane Main Street south. So, I think, you know, everybody's agreed that Main Street would not be 5 lanes, and Main Street would be the maximum 3, which is basically a center turn lane and 2 travel lanes. The one comment that I had, and I think Sunrise concurs, was on the table 1, where it talks about thresholds. The Main Street South, which is Silver Reef Road to Cemetery Road, the vehicles per day, I think we suggested was 8,100 instead of the 10,005. And that translated under their traffic study to a level of service C. But make a note that when it reaches that 8,100, then it's further reviewed. I mean, you don't have to draw a hard line in the sand. You can say 8,100 is the cap for traffic on Main Street, but you know, at that point you're open to see how that really translates into stops and traffic problems.
And right now, what's our traffic count per day?
1,700.
So we're gonna move from 8,100 to 9,800.
Well, right now in this table, you can see they're suggesting that the threshold, you know, that Main Street could handle up to 10,500. I think we're suggesting that that be lowered down to 8,100 as a cap. That it may be a soft cap. It may be 8,100 is the limit, trips per day, or vehicles per day, and then it will be it could be reevaluated at that time.
But that's total down to Leeds or Grapevine Wash.
No, total town of Leeds, all traffic.
All traffic count.
All traffic.
8,100.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep in mind, that's all of Leeds, and that number doesn't specifically apply just to one development or one developer. That would be all-inclusive.
Let me make this comment. This is my take on it. Imagine you're building an archway. There's one stone that's crucial. It's called the keystone that holds the whole arch together. And the second paragraph really doesn't help the town out, because this town road, Main Street, is owned by UDOT until they give the street to us, and then it's our maintenance. But if we looked at the cost sharing, we don't have a budget large enough to match. So if Grapevine said, okay, it costs $250,000 to add these 2 lanes, which might be a low estimate, we wouldn't have $250,000 to match to go towards the project. So I think it is unrealistic for us to even make any promise for any match, because we don't have a budget large enough to do that. So I think where we really go back to square one is Grapevine needs to find the access of the roads that they pay for the development, and not have the town be involved in trying to mitigate the situation for them. So we want to help them with the project, but we don't have the money in our budget, which would mean if we were going to do it, we would have to do a bond to come up with funds to go towards the project.
Mayor, may I clarify that there? I think we can clarify the language in there, because that wasn't the intent to contribute for the town to match their own, you know, out of their own coffers. The intent of that language, and we can rewrite it however it's more clear, is that we would be the source of that town matching fund. To UDOT. Not that we would, for example's sake, give $5, expect the town to give $5, and then go to the UDOT with those 10. We would expect that Grapevine, unless the town, obviously we're not going to tell the town not to or to do. What we're suggesting is that we would be open to making that match on behalf of the town.
Okay, so Grapevine Wash development.
But it just says here that it's a match with the town.
It says a match with the UDOT funds.
Of UDOT funds, not the town funds, of UDOT funds.
It says they willing to commit funds to the town of Leeds for a match of UDOT funds. So, in a roundabout way.
But in most cases, for towns to get these, they, like Cedar City and others, have put money in to match, even though the amount you're talking about would be too small for an interchange of a couple $1 million.
Yeah, not necessarily. We don't know. I mean, what our intent would be is to more or less offer funds to the town, so the town could go turn around and say, hey, UDOT, we have this for whatever improvement we need to our traffic situation.
I think great idea.
As long as Grapevine is willing to. I know, but the only thing we don't solve is the traffic problem.
But the next paragraph, I think, does cover that quite well. And because in this table 1, it says the vehicles per day becomes the threshold, and that's what we're suggesting a change, at least by that one number. But it, it says in the middle of that paragraph, it says Grapevine acknowledges that once the established traffic thresholds have been reached, the town may, in its reasonable discretion, withhold additional Grapevine building permits until the required improvements are made. So if you set, for example, Main Street as a cap at 8,100, which we're suggesting is probably a good number, then when that number is reached, and it's not just Grapevine, it's total traffic on Main Street, then if the interchange or some other improvement isn't there, that's when building permits are capped.
Well, there's a problem with that, Bob. Okay, so there's land between Grapevine and the town of Leeds. So somebody wants to be in the neighborhood, but they don't want to be in Grapevine. So they build in Homespun or Spun. So now you have more traffic that's added to that, so we're controlling one group, but we have no control on the other group for the expansion around the development of Grapevine.
Yeah.
It's kind of like if the development goes, then they build a school, and then people move in where there's a school, and we've increased the number of traffic because even though Grapevine's restricted, the Homespun and the other property in the county is not restricted, so therefore we have increased growth exponentially.
Well, yeah, that's a very valid issue, but, and here's one way, development in general, whether it's water, sewer, capacity, is on a first come, first served basis.
Right.
And so roads would be no different. I mean, or at least you could consider it that way. You're gonna say, when Main Street reaches a certain level, then that's when the permits stop, and that applies, I guess, across the board. And that's where your traffic impact fees become a real important factor, and that's when the pressure really builds to build a new interchange or modify the existing interchanges. But anyway, your point's a good one, and I think you can look at it the same way you would look at water system capacity, sewer capacity.
Right.
First come, first served. When it's gone, it's gone.
What I'd like to see some clarification on is the proportional cost sharing, and how is that proportional cost established? I think it could be is have a traffic impact study done, show, and can you put a little counter on the road going into Grapevine and calculate how many trips are actually going in and out of there? And I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but I think in this agreement there ought to be something establishing how we're going to calculate that.
Normally, there's trip generation manuals that are uniformly accepted across the country. They're prepared by the Institute of Traffic Engineers, and it will calculate the typical single-family detached dwelling will typically generate, and in this case it's 10 trips per unit. And a townhome would be 8, and a condominium might be 6 or 7. And you could rely on those as reasonable figures for how many trips that would, when you approve a subdivision plan, a building permit, what the effect on the traffic is going to be.
So if that's the standard that's out there, I would suggest that we put that language in there. Say, this is what we're going to use when we hit that point. That way, we don't get to a point years in the future and we say it should be one, and they say it should be another, and then we end up in a battle over it.
Another point, if I may add, if that's okay, Mayor, in addition to what Bob just mentioned, is it's likely as Grapevine builds out, it will be contributing the lion's share of additional traffic. However, there's subdivision X and subdivision Y and community Z, on other undeveloped land in the town and in adjacent communities. How we're, and this is pretty standard in the industry, is, and it goes back to the point about impact analysis, is if one home is built, that home has an impact assigned to it based on these trip generation standards that are accepted throughout the nation. And so, you know, while Grapevine acknowledges we may be contributing 100 of those trips, subdivision Z may be contributing 5, subdivision X may be contributing 6. And so in that proportion, we would pay for 100, subdivision X 5, subdivision Y, or whatever I use. The other, you know, that's the proportion, and it's pretty straightforward, and that's something that the town engineer can establish. We're happy, obviously, to when we make application for a subdivision permit or a site plan, to prepare our own analysis and have the town's engineer review, or however the town's comfortable with that. But those proportionalities aren't kind of a mystic kind of guess, kind of shot in the dark. They're very straightforward and easy to calculate.
And they're established off from the calculations used for the impact fees. Now keep in mind that the dynamics that exist on Main Street, because we cannot collect impact fees on Main Street because it's not Leeds.
Right.
So that's one of the dynamics that exists there that we're going to have to deal with. And we cannot calculate an impact fee for Main Street.
We collect the impact fees off the infrastructure that's being built and Grapevine costs.
Well, we've suggested, and this will go to the next point in the development agreement you've read, an idea called payment in lieu of impact fees. That would be a mechanism that could easily get around if it is true that the town can't assess impact fees on Main Street because of its character as a state facility. We could easily say, you know what, we acknowledge this, go to the UDOT. I think they mentioned this in their meeting, that they'd be fine with some type of agreement with the town, that we simply just pay you a payment in lieu of impact fee. That's more or less an impact fee, but we call it a payment in lieu of, to handle Main Street or state-related facilities.
Great. I appreciate talking about X, Y, and Z developments. So potentially, besides Grapevine, we would have 4 developments. One which is Silver Reef Highlands, which only has about 6 houses or so out of the 27 lots that homes are built on. So there, and then you've got Silver Point, and then you've got School Land Trust. I forgot what the name of that property was. Sitless, but I mean the name of the subdivision they were going to use. And then we have the one up here that has like 70 lots on it.
I don't remember the number.
68. I think the problem the town's faced with is the fact that if your development takes off, there is no doubt, if we did a probability study, the likelihood of the other 4 developments would take in place too, because it would mean the economy is up and swinging and there is a need for development, as large as your project is. So the question would be, how long could that sustain, and what would be the outcome for the town to be able to handle the traffic aspect? And I think that's the biggest problem we have. It's not the mixed use, it's not the plan or the development of it. It's just the fact of what are we going to do with the traffic?
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
We're a veteran community. I mean, people have to drive to their work, or they work on the farm here, or are self-employed. So I mean, everybody's got to drive their kids to the different schools. I mean, they all can't make it on the bus for the activities. So we're really beyond the normal traffic scope. The standards they use are not applicable to a town of Leeds because we have a unique dimension. Everybody in this room has hauled their kids to soccer practice. I know I hauled my daughter down, all the way down to Dixie Middle, and then next time to another school and another school. So, I mean, and how many trips we've all made, you know. Everybody's got soccer mom on the vehicles. So, probably make 8 trips, and you've got kids going to school and activities, so there's a lot more traffic.
Well, in response to that, Frank, I mean, it's a very legitimate concern, obviously. I want to defer to Bob to answer that, but I guess from the developer's perspective, we've done everything we can to stick to, you know, to national standards, these chip generations, and so if you feel like nationally accepted standards don't apply in Leeds, we need to understand what your standard is. And we will meet that.
Well, Bob, I think the reason that that Sunrise was looking at that 8,100, we're just going to say that in a general number. Let's not get so focused on that, was a level of service that, and explain that level of service to people.
Well, level of service is A through F, I believe, and A is the ultimate best, and that's what Main Street is today, and that usually relates to the amount of time you have to wait at an intersection. Typically, there's some other things that revolve around it. But I don't think generally you would want to, set anything below level of service. C is still good service, minimal waits at intersections. Generally traffic moves well, etc. There are definitions for those different levels of service. I don't have them with me right here, but the thing about this table 1 and setting the threshold of 8,100, yeah, there's nothing magic. It's just a target that kind of translates to what they said level of service C. 8,100 is about a 5-fold increase out of what traffic is out there today.
Yeah.
But so you set a number, and then you say, at that point, we're willing to reevaluate whether cap needs to stay. But that's how you protect it. And always, I think the question you raised is real. And probably the best way is it's first come, first served. That's the way infrastructure is handled. You can't observe. So if you set Main Street at a certain threshold, and then it's first come, first served, and when that's reached, development I guess comes to a standstill until alternative access or the interchanges are modified or something.
Danielle.
I'm trying to understand the dedicated amount of money that they want to give to UDOT through our town. Is that inadvertently going to be reimbursed back as traffic impact fee credits in any way, or is that just a gesture of goodwill?
Drake, do you understand that question?
I do.
I'll allow you to answer that question.
I hate saying this, it depends. It definitely is a gesture of goodwill, understanding the town's interest in not changing the character of Main Street to a fly lane facility. And so we thought, in fact, the Planning Commission, it came up in that discussion, they loved the idea of taking money that would be required to make it a fly lane facility, and instead of making it a fly lane facility, taking that money and giving it to the town to work something out with UDOT. Where impact fee credits may or may not apply or be valid or even be allowed is if we contribute or build or construct, and these are defined terms in the Utah impact fee law. If we construct or pay for a system improvement, then we can go to the town and enter into a reimbursement agreement for impact fee credits in the amount of that system improvement cost. The other defined term is a project improvement. If the improvement is 100% just for a particular development, then those funds are not available for impact fee credits. That's just a cost of doing development.
So when you build your home, Danielle, you pay an impact fee.
Right.
So what they're doing is they're offering X amount of dollars up front to pay for the infrastructure needed for the amount of traffic for this mitigation plan, and not paying impact fees till they hit that certain threshold where it matches up with that dollar amount that they don't pay up front.
Well, that's not what I'm hearing.
That's on a system improvement. Danielle, I would say that what Grapevine is proposing in this statement that Bob read is a proportional amount that they would be willing to match UDOT funds.
And I understand that, and Drake, you're saying a project one, you can't have impacts in a system, you can have impact fee credits, or which one?
Yeah, that's right.
Project you cannot, right? Is that what
Project
you're
we can't because it's just, that's what we have to do our development.
You can for a project, and a system you can't, or which?
No,
I'm
the other way
sorry,
around.
I'm sorry.
If it's, so let's, the system is like the whole town.
Okay,
And where it comes back to is a town's impact fee analysis. So if the town says, we're gonna conduct an impact fee analysis, and we're gonna list streets A through F, and we are designating these streets as system streets, meaning they're streets that benefit the entire town, not just a particular subdivision. Then the town itself has kind of put a stake in the sand that said, these streets A through F are system streets. They're for the town's general purposes. If we were to build any of those streets, then we could apply for impact fee credits. If it's just a project street or an improvement that benefits only Grapevine, then it makes sense that we shouldn't be reimbursed for impact fee credits because it's not benefiting the town as a whole, it's just benefiting our project.
so the roundabout, or whatever that's called, the new exit is a system?
Well, right now, it's not on the town's impact fee analysis, it's kind of up in the,
It's not something that the town assesses impacts for because we don't own it.
therefore there's no credits for it.
But
There
would
are
you-
no credits available for it. That's
But
something
would
that
they be able to get the credits for it though, if they're putting it for?
they could not, because the town does not do impact fee credits for it, because the town doesn't collect impact fees
For that
for, yes.
specific improvement.
Okay, so I guess my question then is Grapevine inadvertently at some time hoping to be able to get the credits for the UDOT match? Or is this just, like my original question, is this just for goodwill? I think.
I can't answer that question. I can tell you that they could not get credits for it. Because
Before they
we
sign
don't,
it, will we know?
say again?
Before you sign the agreement, will you know?
Yeah, we know right now, because they can't get credits for
Okay,
it.
okay.
Because it's not something that we collect impact fees on. We don't own it. How can you collect an impact fee on something that's not yours?
Can you come back later on, can Grapevine come back later on and say, look, we did this and now you are collecting impacts, can we kind of retro? Drake, is that like something fair that a developer could do?
My question would be, would the Diamond Interchange ever be a town facility?
No, the Diamond
So then
Interchange
the
would
town
not.
will never collect an impact fee on Diamond Interchange?
That's correct.
So then there will never be an opportunity for an impact fee credit,
Not on the interchange
not on
itself.
Diamond Interchange.
I'd like to use a silly analogy if the council will allow me. We've all been to Parent University, where we've been to parenthood, and our kids say, well, give me $25 and I'll clean the car and I'll vacuum, and we give them the money, and then later on, they say, well, I'd like this new surfboard, and I'll put it on your American Express bill, but I'll pay you back when I clean your cars again. The level of getting the car cleaned is a 5-minute job, which, you know, gets me $5 for it. And I find it's very difficult to deal with things that are not tangible, knowing what the value of something for a credit. And I think it's a dangerous situation for us as a town to get into, to go that direction, because, I mean, we love our kids and we spend the money for them, but we never, we get the idea of the MasterCard as a wonderful experience, as they have says, priceless. But it's a learning lesson.
The nice thing is that the town never has that credit card in the first place to pay
Right.
for it.
Exactly.
And so that's the nice thing
Yeah.
about these credits.
But I'm going back to my parenthood and raising my kids, I think I would use the same trust in doing the town, that I would extend the credit.
It's not an extension of credit. That's it in a nutshell.
All it is that the town in their impact fee analysis says, these are our system projects. We're paying for them as a town. But then developer A comes by and says, you know what, we're developing right next to that road A that you have on your system improvements. We're gonna put it in. And so instead of you forking out the cash, the capital, the resources to put it in. The developer does, and it's just a very reasonable, very American request that if the developer pays for something the town was planning on, well, then just give us impact fee credits that we sell back as to our builders, and they come back and they get that particular fee covered. I mean, that's about as American and as you can find in land development.
Well,
It is an impact fee then, for this, like building.
I mean, I don't want to dwell on it, but the problem of it is there's 800 residents or 500 residents that are impacted by the aspect to allow for increase. So, I mean, everybody on Main Street and therefore are impacted. They're not getting the benefit of that. So, I mean, that's my whole point of making is that, you know, everybody else is sacrificing for the development of an issue. We're not directly being benefited.
But my understanding is that the end source for the funds to make the improvement to our system, let's say it's a new roundabout at an intersection. The idea being that the money's got to come from somewhere. The town doesn't have money for it now, so the developer puts it in. And where does the money ultimately come from? It comes from the end homeowner who's building in their development, who would have been paying an impact fee. Well, and they are paying the impact fee on that. They're still going to be paying that, but instead of coming to the town, it goes to essentially pay for the cost of that improvement.
Yeah, but there's an economic problem with it, because you're assuming that the whole development will be completed based on proportionality of the cost per unit.
Yes, but if the development's not built out, and never is, the developers pay the upfront costs.
Yeah, the town's not out anything, because let's say that roundabout costs $1 million. The town gets that bam in one day, or however long it takes to construct the thing. Let's call it one day. The town is made whole. You have your inspector go, they accept it. You have this awesome new facility. So we get $1 million. Let's say that the system improvement was 100%. We get $1 million and a stack of 500 paper vouchers. Guess how long it takes for us to get made whole? Decades, or maybe a decade. Where the town is made whole in an instant, the developer, time value of money, we're taking down 10 homes a month or 10 homes a year, however much it will be, and we're waiting over years to be reimbursed for that. And the town's made whole in an instant, and so there's nothing out economically, financially, socially, every which way around. I mean, I think it would be clear that that's why there's a Utah Impact Fee Act that is very clear about this arrangement between municipalities and folks that put in improvements.
Well, I don't want to dwell on it, but if I was an investor, I would not invest in the project knowing that I'm going to front up $1 million and wait 20 years to get my money back. That would not be an investment I would make. That's the whole point of making it. It sounds great, but I don't know who wants to front $1 million to build something and they haven't got the development going.
There's no one, but there's obviously you're going to make money to get the return.
That's why I use the silly analogy about it's the kids.
I see the risk being on the developer in this case, but not necessarily on the town. But help me, if there are risks to the town, help me understand those.
There are a lot of risks.
If the development changes hands, then those contractual agreements change hands as well.
Yeah, the agreements run with it, whatever agreements.
Usually they're assignable though, the successor inside.
We haven't gotten all the way through this traffic mitigation plan, but the key, I think, is, the threshold in table 1. Because that's what is stipulated, but that's, page 3 talks about the number of accesses, which we've already gone over, the 3 accesses based on the number of units. I think, in Sunrise, I don't know how carefully they scrutinized all the vehicles, but on the Main Street South, Silver Reef Road to Cemetery Road, where now it says 10,500, we suggest it would be probably 8,100, with a note saying that in at the time that capacity is reached or that threshold is reached, then it would be reevaluated, so it's kind of a soft cap.
And I think that's where we have to rely some on our engineers. And if we don't agree with them, then why do we hire them? We should hire somebody that, if we don't agree with them. And I'm not picking on Sunrise, I'm saying that about any contractual firm that you hire. And I have to applaud them for saying, look, I think that a level C of service is where we need to look at triggering that. Now, there are some other arguments that people would make on, well, normally a level B is where you look at and start making improvements. I mean, ultimately, that's going to be up to the town. I guess what's kind of ironic, Frank, is we don't own the road, but we have the ability to say, oh, this is what we're going to allow for development that would impact that road. So I have to applaud Sunrise a little bit by, I'm not sure that the word cautious is there, but at least it's a lower trigger point that says, hey, let's not push it out that far before we reevaluate. And that would be for any and all development.
Well, we could go to UDOT and say, we could beg them to say, give us Main Street. And they might turn it over to us. I'm just using it as a scenario, just bear with me. Then that Main Street would be our liability to maintain. And because it would be a greater cost because of the number of vehicles going down that street, that would exceed our repair budget. But let's say we didn't have UDOT give us the property. Well, let's do another analysis that the traffic gets so heavy on Main Street that people who live on Main Street say, well, you know, this is really getting bad, it's going to get worse, so I'm going to put my house up for sale. So I sell my house for $90,000, but now because the traffic's increased, the house next to it was $130,000 is now $80,000, and it keeps going that way. And all of a sudden, everybody loses value on Main Street. Instead of being a family dwelling area to raise kids, it becomes a commercial area where there's high traffic. So you look at the impact, and every family has lost $30,000 to $40,000 in the value of their property because we've increased the impact on the street. And that's the whole point I'm trying to make is, it's not right to the residents that are here that they should lose property value. There's a domino effect because if the property value goes down in town, it's going to affect all the other areas in town, just not on Main Street, but on the other arteries in other areas. And if you look at the data, and we've got several people in real estate, Leeds, as far as property value, had a big hit in evaluation of property. And you can ask our council member there, and we're one of the harder hit areas because a lot of the homes here were very high priced and they've dropped by 30, 40% in value. And that's all we need to have more drop in value. People that have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 or $2 million home are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars of depreciation so that someone else can put a development in and impact us with traffic. And I'm saying no.
You've got one more issue, Bob. I don't know this answer. When you get to a certain amount of traffic, mitigation plan, you're not allowed to back onto Main Thoroughfare. And most of the houses up and down Main Street back on Main Street. What is that traffic count number? Do you know that? That's a good question.
No, I don't know. Again, I do not, that's a good point, yeah. Well, at what point does they have to?
I see what you're saying, Frank, though, but what is that magic number?
I don't know, but we could find out.
It's a lot of traffic.
I just think it's fair to the citizens that we look at this and find out what the real impact, and then say to them, well, if there's 2,100 cars going down now, it's going to be 4,000. So they need to be aware of that, and know what impact that's going to have. Is that only in peak times, or is that a consistent time? Is that morning and afternoon? What about the stay-home moms that have their kids are taking care of it? Is the traffic so much that they can't even go out and stroll on the street too close and walk there because of the sidewalks are kind of like roller coaster?
Mayor, may I submit that this data is, especially this number of 8,100 has been submitted to the town council from its own engineer. In that analysis, they look at all of those questions, Frank, that you're bringing up. They haven't done this in the dark, uninformed, uneducated. They use standards that are applied nationally to generate how a level of service is affected, improved, or negatively affected. And it's not just this guessing game. I would submit that the town's engineer has proposed, made a recommendation that's different from what we have proposed, our engineer. The point is Main Street, it's so ironic. Main Street, do we all recall? Main Street was Old Highway 91. This was a state highway. This is not a residential street. This place has so much capacity that you can see, based on the analysis that the town's own engineer has done and the applicant's, our engineer has done, that demonstrates how much unused capacity is on that facility. For it to get just up to 8,100 just to get an LOSC, which is actually a really good level of service.
Trey, I think that's the real issue, is what we get to decide is what level of service are we comfortable with for Main Street? Is it level of service C, is it level of service B, or is it A? And what is that threshold? Our engineer has established 8,100 would be a level of service C, and maybe we ought to go sit on some street corners at our level of service C and see what traffic's like.
And there are definitions. This has kind of a synopsis, but doesn't include a clear definition. There is definitions, typically how long a wait at an intersection, a level service C and B and A. But this little statement out of the traffic engineering manual, I'll just read a couple sentences. It says, LOS is a term used by the Highway Capacity Manual to describe traffic operations based on congestion. LOS is usually reserved for intersections, but an approximation can also be helpful in describing congestion conditions on roadway sections. It ranges from LOS-A, which is almost no congestion, to LOS-F, which traffic demand is above capacity and gridlock is common. LOS-C is generally considered acceptable. Capacity estimate shown in figure 3 or whatever. So, I mean, that's just their manual, but acceptable for what or to who? That's the issue.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it does vary from town to town, what you feel is appropriate.
Well, I mean, the council would we be willing to drop that number to, let's say, there's some numbers to 4,000, and 4,000, we hit that 4,000 mark, reconsider, see how it affects the convenience.
There's a cause and effect. So I'll use an example, and Rick, I'm not picking on you, but if I made the threshold 3,500 and you really want to develop it, then your developers and owners would seek other alternative ways of roads because they would be motivated to know that if they don't get it developed, they're not going to be able to use Main Street. So as long as the number is high enough, it gives you flexibility to move down, but there needs to be an incentive part that doesn't affect adversely the residents of the street. You know, when Brigham Young designed the streets, he made it so that you could have 4 wagons going down the street at the same time. So Utah was very far in advance in developing. That's why a lot of these roads through all these little towns are really wide. The highway department back in the 50s or even earlier than that would have never designed them that way if it hadn't been something that Brigham Young had recommended. So, I mean, the question is, what would motivate your development to look for other alternative roads versus using Main Street is really the big question. I mean, what happens if we set a threshold at 8,000, but the other 4 developers start building, and all of a sudden you're limited to 25 units? You would want to have you would want to have an alternative. So I think we need to suggest that you guys need to find some alternative ways of
Well, I would
But
respond to
not
that,
on Main Street.
Frank, that we've done that. We've done that. The town's engineer has given a different recommendation. I would hope that the town wouldn't do something arbitrary and capricious. That's just kind of out of whim and let's get a dartboard up and start throwing darts. That's very, we would hope that we could speak rationally together and reasonably together and establish an objective threshold, which we pay our engineers, you on your side, on our side, to do that for us. And to, frankly, I like science. To me, the numbers speak for themselves. And when an engineer on more than one side of a discussion says, you know what, nationally accepted standards show that Main Street and its current configuration has a chunk of unused capacity, then I rely on that as a non-engineer. And so, you know, I don't know other than that how to respond. I mean, if you're going to respond and limit us, I frankly feel that that's arbitrary and capricious, definitely not fair, because it's based on no science, it's based on just a whim of yours or whoever's, and it has no basis. If I were making a decision, I would want to make a decision that I could stand on and support.
But if we had cheeseburgers that had to cross the street, we might hold back, you know, some of the, I mean, you know, saying there are other factors.
We just haven't met any of those cheeseburgers yet, so.
Well, don't worry about it. Get cheeseburgers in there.
Question for you, on these impact, and I'm sorry, Daniel, when I meant building permits, I mean impact fees. My line on my cost breakdowns, I put everything in the building permits for impact fees. Say these other developments do develop, and Great West subdivision's only able to get up 30 units. These other developers that are developing the maturity of the town, their impact fees are ultimately going to pay off to the city to pay off their contribution to widen Main Street as well, correct?
No.
Well, here's the deal.
So they'll be stuck with, if you get that 8,000 threshold mark, then they've got 25 units up, they're still on the line for that $1 million, and they're just stuck until they find another avenue.
Yeah, the tricky part, takes some, some help from the attorney company. The state impact fee law says you cannot collect impact fees for state facilities. That's what, and the second part also says when you do collect the impact fee, you have to use it within 6 years or return it. So those both potentially, so that's where Grapevine has come up with a fee in lieu of, which therefore maybe would be a legal way to address those problems somehow, to put the money either on Main Street or to an interchange and not be bound by the 6-year time limitation. But those are some things you're going to have to work through.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, if it takes them 3 years to get developed out there, and some of these other developments do take off, they may get stuck with 30 units out there when they hit that certain threshold,
Yeah.
and they've got X amount of dollars.
Yeah. That's the
in
risk.
lieu of.
When you have a facility or an infrastructure where it's got a certain capacity and it's first come, first served, and there's a risk on it. Who's going to get to it first?
And it's going to be a lot more than $1 million, we're just using that as a count that big.
I think that's where the town needs to look at this as a responsibility too, not just pushing this off on developers. I think the town needs to look at the future planning. And I thought in some great discussion that was had with UDOT a number of years back between the town and UDOT, that we were in favor of looking at different access points, including a diamond interchange. And so I think it's important that we look at what needs to happen for the future, whether it's Grapevine, whether it's John Doe, or whatever piece of properties are out there that have potential for development, and how they're going to potentially impact the traffic that's here. Ultimately, we're dealing with Grapevine right now because that's the applicant that's before us. It won't be any different than other applicants that come in the future.
Well, I agree with Frank. I think there's got to be a lower number incentivize not only Grapevine, but other developers and other developments in the area, to proceed and push that diamond ring. If not, it's just gonna lack of that 8,000 mark, and then everything was stagnant for 2 years.
Well, you know, the first statement, the first paragraph on this draft, it states that Horrocks, Grapevine's engineers, conclude that Grapevine itself is not going to trigger a freeway interchange. Four-way. Just because of the numbers. Those numbers would still not be enough. Something that I was thinking about was, if we're currently at 1,700 and we progress to 5,000, it seemed like at that point, somewhere in there, we would need a traffic light, which, if it's still UDOT, we would have to depend on them, put it in, and they aren't gonna wanna spend the money unless we provide the money.
Well, may I clarify that, Angie?
Sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you read further in our draft mitigation plan that you have in front of you, though, we can easily attribute where traffic's coming from on Main Street, especially where we're located. And so, just in your specific example, there may be someday in the future a traffic light that's warranted, and that's a term that we talked about in our meeting 2 weeks ago. There's another set of standards that say these things, when these things are triggered, then a traffic light is warranted. If that's the case then, and through counting trips, you know, those little pneumatic counters, you can count trips, and it will be really easy to determine where those cars are coming from. And those can be assigned to Grapevine or to wherever those are coming from, and that speaks to this proportionality issue. If 45% of those cars are coming from Grapevine and 35 from there and whoever else, then by all means, Grapevine needs to step up, or should be required to step up to say, you know what, 45% of that cost of name the improvement, if it's a traffic light, is borne by the contributor of that impact. And we're very clear in that in our traffic mitigation plan later in a paragraph or two beyond where you're reading. I mean, we have no intention to get away from our share of impact.
Danielle?
In reading the traffic impact study that was done by Corpus Engineering, I think there might be a little error, because when they were here a couple weeks ago, I did ask them a question about the fact that in that traffic impact study, it specifically states that the current Leeds Road is 2 lanes and turning, and so it would be 3. And I asked him that direct question, and he said, well, yeah, you have 3 lanes here. And I said, we actually don't. We have, at the top of town when you're about ready to get onto the interstate, there are 3 lanes, but the rest of them are not. And in that traffic impact study, it specifically states that right now, that's what they based all of these numbers on, was a 3-lane road. And in actuality, we only have 2. And so I'd kind of like to see if we could get that error adjusted and see if some of the numbers might be different.
Yeah, Mayor, if I can respond to that, I appreciate that concern, Danielle. I know you brought up that before. Those counts that we have are actually counted. Those counts are based on actual trips. So whether it was described as a 2-lane facility or a 2-lane with a turn lane, that doesn't really matter. It was based on actual counts.
Ultimately, their impact study says that for Grapevine and the density that's there, that requires 5 lanes. That's what their impact study ultimately says.
If it said that we actually only had 2 right now, would it change at all, or could we get some type of maybe something in writing stating that they understand that it is a 2-lane and it's not a 3? Because to me, if I read that impact study and it said that there was actually 3 lanes right now, it would probably change my whole idea of what it would need, because it wouldn't be that broad of a scope to add 2 more if there was only 3. Now, it would be a lot broader scope if there was just 2 and you were adding 3. Does that?
I think the general consensus of this group, when we had dialogue, with UDOT on Main Street that we were agreeable to Main Street being a 2-lane with a center turn lane. That's the way that we envision Main Street. Yes. Betty, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I was told by the RPO traffic engineer that your interchanges would cost like in the $6 million range. So are you saying, or are we saying, is this what is, we've decided is that UDOT would pay $3 million and Grapevine would pay $3 million?
No,
That hasn't been discussed yet.
Is what?
no, we're not.
Discussed yet.
Well, I mean, I'm just throwing that out. as-
All I would be doing is, I would be speculating on that, Betty. That's all I would be doing. On the actual amount, on,
But what,
May
didn't
I?
you say that?
Yeah, go ahead,
we
Joe.
matched
When I was
UDOT?
sitting in on the UDOT meeting, when they were talking, came here to the town hall talking about freeway interchanges, UDOT ultimately is responsible for 100% of those funds. But they have said that, the example they gave out was the Cedar City new interchange, the north end of Cedar City. The Cedar City well, UDOT is slated with so many different projects. Everybody wants a project, and they only have so many resources. So in order to incentivize UDOT to put that Cedar City interchange in, Cedar City said, we're going to contribute X amount of dollars. I don't remember what the figure was. And my understanding what Grapevine is proposing is saying, hey, if we can get the Leeds freeway interchange moved up on their list by contributing whatever money we were going to spend on impact Main Street to turn that into a 5-lane road, we're going to take that money, give it to the town of Leeds, so the town of Leeds can go to UDOT and say, hey, we've got money to contribute toward a freeway interchange. That's my understanding of the whole deal.
that's exactly the way it's written right there in that traffic mitigation plan.
Just a question, it was mentioned there's this idea of a payment in lieu of impact fee, and it was said unequivocally that an impact fee credit could not be granted on something like the interchange. Could a credit be granted on a payment in lieu of impact fee if the interchange were to be paid for in that manner?
I think we would have to define that in our agreement, and I would say no.
Well, the reality is this, the state legislators, depending on who is in leadership, can funnel some money to special projects. We don't have anybody right now in this area. We did have David Clark, who was Speaker of the House, who could have helped, having UDOT focus some money towards the project. But based on the data on consensus and based on the stats that GOED, which is the Governor's Office of Economic Development, statement that our county has a 2.6 growth rate instead of having a 6.5, means that the chances of us getting additional highway funds down in this area is becoming very bleak. So that has a great impact on developments in this town, because the probability of having an interchange of that cost and magnitude either is going to take some political or federal matching funds or some other special things to happen. So we have to be very careful in how we're looking at development, because if Summit County and Washington County are going to be paralyzed by the factor of the growth, and to give you an example, this county over the 20 years had these different spurts and had a great growth. But when the state had done the development, they showed that there wasn't going to be this growth for 40 years or more. They didn't expect things to happen, and there were factors of the highway being put in, and there was air conditioning, there was Bloomington, and all those factors helped spur the growth in the community. But now things have slowed down, and so those factors could affect it, because Utah County has been taking the lump share of highway money in the development. As you get up in the Salt Lake area, you'll see all that development going on. So, I mean, we have to be very, very careful about how we plan to do things, because we may not get our fair share unless we get some people in leadership to represent Southern Utah. And we don't have the money that Cedar City has to put in the project. I mean, just being realistic. So what I think we want to ask the developers, we want you to do your project, but keep it in mind that we are limited in how we want to impact the rest of the people in the community.
Great.
Something I may submit that we really haven't brought up formally, but just in light of the conversation, you know, we kind of speak of 5-lane Main Street or a new interchange, kind of two alternatives. What we fail to recognize is that there are interim solutions between those two extremes. One that our engineer brought up, and we suggested it to the town's engineer, Sunrise, and Bob was there, which everyone loves. I spoke to UDOT about it, and we may throw it into the mix with this feasibility study that's happening with the RPO, is an interim solution which has a lot of promise. There's been no engineering, so this is just something that is something to demonstrate that there are interim fixes as opposed to two extremes. And that is simply adding a southbound on-ramp to the two legs of the north interchange that we have currently. What that would do, we all know the lion's share of the traffic is heading south from here. And that's a big impact on the heart of Main Street, through the heart of town here. And so that's just, you know, throwing out there, when we speak of 5 lanes or a new interchange, we need to understand we don't know the full picture at this point. It could be that there's an interim solution that makes a ton of sense, that's significantly cheaper than by all means a full new interchange, or even, you know, 2 new legs to make this a full diamond. So I hope that we're keeping our minds open enough and not kind of, you know, focusing on so many specific things that we're not thinking of. There's kind of there's a laundry list of interim solutions that could be, well, I shouldn't say a laundry list. There's other solutions that could come as a phased approach to a new interchange.
They have to drive back up north to get home.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just takes half the traffic off of Main Street.
It puts them back on Main Street to get home.
And that puts it back to what I interpreted as Frank's idea is to incentivize the developers to work on an alternative issue and set that limit at a lower rate.
I won't disagree with that, Nate, but I don't think you can just pick a number out. I mean, you either have to say, what is the number that supports a specific level of service, and there has to be some type of scientific facts that are determined by our engineers. Otherwise, you know, it could be contested, and I would rather not go down that road. I'd rather say, this is what we decided, that, and if we decided that it's going to be a level of service of A, and there is no discussion on that, that's something that needs to be decided, and that's what will decide that number.
In that traffic impact study, Angela, in that exhibit J there, I believe it gives a number for level of service B, the traffic count.
What is that number?
Just grab it to see if I can find it.
Sure, if you can find that, I'd be curious to know what that is. Because then we have a concrete, okay, we don't want any less than level of service B, or if we decided C. But then there's something to actually base your decision on.
Okay. Level of service estimate. Yeah, A goes up to a volume of vehicles per day of 3,700.
Okay.
So that would be more than twice what we are currently. which is in the middle, average 8,100. And what they were proposing was a level of service D, which would be below average
Sure.
of the 10,500.
I think it'd be reasonable for
And that's for 2 lanes.
for our town government to say, we want to keep the feeling of Main Street as consistent as it is today as possible. And yet recognize that Main Street can take on some additional traffic. I don't think any of us would argue that we don't want one more car going down Main Street. So, is it B or is it reasonable enough to arbitrarily say, we want it somewhere between B and C? So let's pick halfway in between.
I think the mayor stated we couldn't do that.
I think that you're gonna have to use something. That table right there is a perfect example. I mean, I can't argue with that. I'm not a traffic engineer. Sure.
Well, Joe, assuming that we're A right now,
Yeah.
going to B would be 3,700. So that means that would be an increase of 2,500 by
I think, would you?
1,700.
Did you say that if level service B was 5,800?
Yes.
Yeah, 58, so you said you're about 1,700 cars per day.
So you're 4,000 cars.
Oh, I said that wrong. A is 37.
Yeah, up to,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
If we went to
In
B,
other words, 37 and 1 would take you into level B.
I think we ought to take the responsibility to, I think it'd be reasonable for us to all go sit down on a street corner that is level of service B and see what it feels like. And if, as town citizens and as town officials, we say, yeah, I can live with that, it's a reasonable amount of traffic, and we ought to sit down on the corner that's level of service C. But right now, I don't think any one of us has any comprehension of what these numbers really are.
And I would pull out that I think that myself or the Sunrise, we could probably bring at the next meeting or future meeting some indication whether it's a video or something that we might help kind of give you a feel for what those level services would be. You know, short of maybe actually going out and standing on the street corner, but maybe that would be the alternative.
can you give me an example of what a in St. George or Washington, what a level C is? Washington Dam Road. Well, not Washington Dam Road.
Washington Fields Road?
Washington Fields Road. Would that be a level C?
It's just approved, but yeah, it's probably an A or
There's no traffic stops.
A lot of it depends, again, they focus a lot on the intersection congestion, the amount of time you have to wait at the intersection. Normally, you know, between intersections, traffic flows, it's those intersections that back things up, slow traffic down. Offhand, I made out of don't have something off the top of my head, so we can, sure we can find that out.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was going to say, as I recall, the studies that you're referring to, the different levels include wait times at intersections, but we're just starting to get to. And as traffic flow increases, those wait times increase proportionally. And I would suggest that would be a consideration, not just sitting at the corner on lawn chairs, but experiencing that wait time, additional wait time, and each of the different service levels that results from that increased flow.
Well, and that's why I was trying to get a comparison.
And I think the wait time comes in on each of those homeowners that has a driveway that backs onto Main Street. How long are you gonna have to be looking over your shoulder to find a break in traffic?
Well, and there's a state law. It indicates that you can't back onto a main thoroughfare with X number of cars.
That's probably grandfathered in.
I would wonder though if that would strictly apply to our Main Street where we have way more than a parking lane on the side of the 2 lanes.
Some parts of it.
Yeah, on a good part of it. We do have a section that's barely 2 lanes.
Well, yeah, but they're talking about throwing a third, the center lane, turn lane in, which would eliminate part of that parking lanes on the side.
Yeah. Using it as an example of something I wouldn't want to see, 700 South in St. George. You've driven down there 7 in the morning or 5 o'clock at night. That's a scary road.
Through Dixie High.
Dixie High School, yeah.
Bob, do you have any examples of roads that you can tell us the service levels, B and C?
Not off the top of my head, no, I could get them, pretty quick, but off the top of my head, I don't have any.
These are the roads we've all actually driven on, turned on, waited to turn on.
I'll show you.
Roads that you try to find a stoplight to turn on.
So are we looking at our biggest hangup on this traffic mitigation plan? We're looking at our biggest hangup is the threshold on Main Street, what you're talking about. And I can tell you that I'm not in favor of just pulling a number out of the air. I'm gonna go with documentation that already exists on engineering.
So
I'll try to get some examples for next one.
Okay, and the examples would be,
our engineers recommend a level of service of C as a maximum instead of a level of service of D, which is what their current list of them has. And of course, this is way more than what we have right now. It would be a very different Main Street. This is for 2 lanes. For 3 lanes, that volume goes.
Could you check with UDOT, because up the street here, there were 2 homes that were built, and they were supposed to have their egress and from the back of the property, which never happened. They didn't want them to go out front on the Main Street because you had the Walton Plaza there, and they didn't want backing out into where they had traffic coming out. And the way UDOT was saying it, on Main Street, so many blocks, and then you would allow so many driveways, and there were so many driveways existing. And when they did the new sidewalks, there were some people who did get driveways that had to go back and get permits, and the town had to work that out. So I know there was a lot of confusion on that. So we may have more driveways coming out on Main Street than typically UDOT would allow, and it may really have to factor in determining A, B, or C, because that is a good point that brought up by how many cars have to back out to what level of traffic. So that could be a determining factor right there.
I would agree with the more than probably normal on driveways. This town's created a ton of flag lots that have pushed the number of driveways on the Main Street quite high.
And that may be a determining factor that we may not be we can't go to C. We may only be able to stay at A because of the number of driveways. And that might be a factor. I don't know that for a fact, but check it out.
Or it mandates the circular drive,
Right.
something like that.
I hope not.
Can you give us those numbers again for each letter, if you don't mind?
Okay, level of service A, the volume goes up to 3,700. B is 5,800. C is 8,100. Level D is 10,500. And then there's E that 12,900.
When they did the studies, do you have your peak times listed so you know when the most cars would be doing? I mean, I'm assuming after 10 o'clock you're not going to get that much.
Right.
They,
This is per day.
This is per day, 24-hour day.
did anybody look at it and make it more concise? Like here's the period where it's going to peak.
Yeah, we did. Check the traffic impact study.
Yeah.
Somewhere else. It's not in
Yeah, that
Exhibit
won't
J.
be in part of that. I don't know what those numbers are, Elliot. We have that document.
Does the town have that? If we can come in and look at it?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Now, those numbers that I just gave you are for 2 lanes.
Right. That's not for the 3 lanes.
3 lanes, it goes up a little bit.
But we need to figure one for horses and ATVs and golf carts and tractors.
The county wants you to put in a bicycle lane too, that I can tell you.
When
Or
I
baby carriages too.
Yeah, maybe need some strollers.
When I brought up the aspect of needing, perhaps needing in the future, a traffic light, I was talking about center of town, Main Street, and throughout the figure 5,000. Further on, Drake said that it was addressed, but what this document addresses is a traffic light at 9 North. And that would be warranted at 11,000. It doesn't address what might happen in the center of town here and the need, especially when we have school kids coming and going.
Yeah, I think seeing those examples would be a
Great.
Mayor, just to clarify that, if you look on Main Street South under Table 1, Silver Reef, Main Street South, Silver Reef Road to Cemetery Road, the very first line item as far as possible improvements are spot improvements, which one of those would be a traffic
I
light.
missed that, okay.
And that would be anything below 10,500. I mean, as soon as that's warranted, and again, based on proportionality, let's all pitch in our fair share.
Right, you're right.
Is there any other real issues on this traffic mitigation plan?
I think that's the first hurdle. I think other things follow after that. Do you want a motion?
No, not yet. I wanted one an hour ago. Bob, you have notes of some things that you want, some data that you want to collect?
Yes, we'll bring back some examples of the LOS levels on the letter examples.
I would be looking from this council, this next line item, discussion number 7. Because of the hour, and I know that the applicant may not be real thrilled about this, but this council does need to go into a closed session tonight, and with the hour that we're at, I would be supportive of tabling this item again.
Mayor, I move that item 7 on the discussion agenda be tabled for a future town meeting.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we will table item number 7 on discussion in the future town meeting. Could I get an amendment to that and just specifically on our next council meeting? Because I don't want to leave it open-ended.
Mayor, I amend my motion that item 7 and the discussion on the work session meeting tonight be moved to our next Leeds work meeting on August the 8th.
I'll amend my second.
It's been moved by Frank Whiteko and seconded by Nate Whiteko to table item number 7 to
It is next week.
August. All those in favor? Okay, I need, go ahead.
Stephanie Ford.
Sorry, Bob.
Will still be coming back. Well, we can do the staff report right now. Yeah. Okay. Floor is on your advantage.
Your board has 19 applications. And I had.
For the audience, please respect for still in meeting and still discussing things. And hold conversations.
Of that, I had 7 in the category that's, well, a little better than the others. And I talked to 5 of them to get an idea of what was on their resumes. And of those that I talked to, 2 were more than in the application that you did send to me that time.
Yeah, but I would say that application came in after the deadline. That's all I would say. They're fine with you.
They're looking at I would suggest that's our MP or something, MJ post job.
That's up to this group.
I would like to do that.
We had our jobs.
No, it's not for a job poster.
So the hang up is an application.
Well, what happened is nobody showed up because we boycotted the course.
I do. And probably be better to have
That's all.
better to have this discussion. Because that's what
I don't know. He's one I never knew, but my guess is he joked. Everybody knows.
I have to say, at least one council.
After the guy, after I found out who won, I talked to him.
Findings.
Yeah, make sure that
Final decision. Okay, I need a motion to go into a closed meeting.
I move that we go into the closed meeting. I get to read the bottom. Closed meeting may be held for discussion or professional comments of physical or individuals allowed by Utah State law 52 days 4 days. Also discussion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Frank Boyko, seconded by Joe Allen, to go into a closed meeting for the reasons read. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We'll take 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes and